I took my last breath on the freezing concrete floor of a rusted basement, my body broken and starved by the man my family forced me to marry. When I gasped and opened my eyes, I wasn't in hell. I was back in my childhood bedroom, exactly 1 month before the wedding. My twin sister burst through the door, eyes blazing with greed, demanding we switch fiancés. She thought she was stealing my golden ticket. I just smiled and handed her my death sentence. The smell of copper mold and my own decaying blood was so visceral that I woke up violently, my lungs pulling in air as if I had been submerged in ice water. I scrambled backward, my hands expecting to scrape against the jagged concrete of Dominic Ashford's secret basement. Instead, my fingers sank into the plush, 800 thread count Egyptian cotton of my bed. I sat there trembling cold sweat, matting my hair to my forehead. The sunlight streaming through the sheer curtains of my bedroom in the Clare estate in Boston was blinding. I looked at my hands. They were smooth, manicured, and unbruised. The agonizing ache in my shattered ribs was gone. I stumbled out of bed, my legs giving out beneath me, and crawled to the vanity mirror. Staring back at me was a 22-year-old girl, vibrant, whole, unbroken. My eyes darted to the digital clock on the nightstand. May 14th, 2024. A full month before the double wedding. I pressed a hand over my mouth to muffle the hysterical broken sob that forced its way up my throat. I had died. I knew I had died. Dominic had shattered my knee with a golf club because I had accidentally discovered the dual ledgers of his family's supposedly booming company, Ashford Global. For 3 years, I had lived as the picture-perfect trophy wife in public and a battered prisoner behind the iron-wrought gates of his estate, and my twin sister Chloe. In my past life, she had drawn the short straw. Or so we all thought. She was arranged to marry Noah William. 6 months before the weddings, Noah had been involved in a catastrophic pileup on the interstate. The accident left him with severe facial scarring and paralyzed from the waist down. The prominent William family, disgusted by imperfection, had essentially exiled him to their remote estate in the Berkshires, handing him a meager trust fund to keep him out of the public eye. Chloe had screamed, cried, and threatened suicide to get out of the arrangement, but our father, Reginald Clare, refused to break a contract with the William patriarch. But fate had a twisted sense of humor. While Dominic secretly drove Ashford Global into bankruptcy to fund his gambling and sadistic vices, Noah William had been quietly working from his wheelchair. He was a savant. By our 3rd year of marriage, Noah had launched a cybersecurity firm that revolutionized the tech industry. He became a self-made billionaire, completely eclipsing his own family. Chloe, who had done nothing but complain and ignore him, suddenly found herself the queen of a newly minted empire, draped in diamonds and celebrated in high society. Meanwhile, I was rotting in a basement. The sound of my bedroom door violently swinging open snapped me back to the present. There stood Chloe. We were identical twins, same ash blonde hair, same striking hazel eyes, but our expressions couldn't have been more different. While I was practically a ghost, she looked feverish, her eyes wild with a manic, desperate energy. "Amelia!" she breathed, slamming the door shut behind her. She marched toward me, her hands trembling as she grabbed my shoulders. "We have to talk. Now!" I stared at her, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. "Chloe, what's wrong with you?" "I'm not marrying Noah," she blurted out, her fingernails digging into my skin. "I can't do it, Amelia. I won't do it. You have to trade with me." I froze. In my past life, Chloe had begged our parents to trade, but she had never come directly to me, and she had never looked this fiercely determined, this knowing. Trade, I whispered, testing the waters. But the contracts are signed. You're marrying Noah, and I'm marrying Dominic. Dominic is the heir to Ashford Global. Noah is, well, you know. Chloe's lip curled into a sneer. Don't play dumb with me, Amelia. I know what Noah is. He's a cripple. He's ruined. I am not spending the best years of my life playing nurse to a monster in some depressing cabin in the woods while you get to live in a penthouse and be the toast of Manhattan. I narrowed my eyes. There was something in her tone, a greed that went beyond just wanting a rich husband. She looked at me with an almost triumphant arrogance. She knows, I realized with a shock that sent a cold thrill down my spine. She remembers too, but she didn't remember everything. If Chloe was reborn, her memories only consisted of what she saw Dominic and me posing for Vogue. Dominic throwing lavish charity galas. Dominic buying me a yacht, which he immediately used as collateral for another massive loan. She only saw the glittering facade. She had no idea about the monster hiding behind Dominic's charming smile. She didn't know about the basement, and she didn't know that Noah's billions would only come to fruition if he was left alone to work a process she had nearly derailed in the past life with her incessant whining. Chloe, I said softly, injecting fake hesitation into my voice. You're asking me to give up my future. Dominic will agree to it, she interrupted fiercely. He barely knows you. We're identical, Amelia. We can just tell the families that we fell for the other man. I'll take Dominic. You take Noah. She paused, her voice dripping with venom. If you don't do this, I swear I'll make a scene that will ruin the Claire name forever. I will tell the press Father is forcing me. I will destroy us all. I looked down, hiding the slow, dangerous smile that was spreading across my face. She was practically begging to walk into a slaughterhouse. Fine, I whispered, looking back up with perfectly feigned resignation. If it means that much to you, Chloe, I'll take Noah. Chloe let out a breathless laugh, her eyes shining with triumphant malice. You're such a good sister, Amelia. Don't worry, I'll make sure to invite you to the penthouse once I'm Mrs. Ashford. Enjoy the penthouse, I thought. Just make sure you check the basement. Dinner that evening was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Our parents, Reginald and Beatrice Clare, sat at opposite ends of the long mahogany dining table. Reginald was a man who measured his daughter's worth by the stock prices of their future husbands. Beatrice was a socialite whose only concern was how our weddings would look in the society pages. They had always favored Chloe. She was louder, more demanding, and knew exactly how to play into their vanity. I was the quiet one, the dependable twin. You want to do what? Reginald's voice boomed, his fork clattering against his china plate. He stared at Chloe as if she had grown a second head. Chloe had just delivered a tearful, Oscar-worthy monologue about how she felt a deep spiritual connection to Dominic after running into him at a country club luncheon, and how the thought of caring for Noah's medical needs was causing her severe anxiety. Father, please, Chloe wept, dabbing her dry eyes with a linen napkin. Amelia is so much more patient than I am. She has a gentle soul. She can handle Noah's condition. Dominic and we just click. Reginald turned his piercing gaze to me. Amelia, is this true? You are willing to step down from the Ashford union to marry an invalid. I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap. I knew exactly what to say to seal my escape. Father Chloe is clearly distressed. A distressed bride reflects poorly on the family. If she marries Noah, she will be miserable, and the Williams will notice. I am willing to honor the contract with the Williams. I don't mind a quiet life in the Berkshires. Let Chloe be the face of the family in New York. Beatrice perked up at that. Reginald Amelia has a point. Chloe has the vivacity needed for the Manhattan elite. Amelia has always been more mousy. Perhaps the quiet country life is better suited for her. And Dominic hasn't officially announced the engagement yet. The switch would be seamless. Reginald swirled his scotch, his sharp mind calculating the PR angles. The Williams won't care which twin marries Noah as long as the alliance is secured and he is taken off their hands. And George Ashford loves Chloe's spirit. He sighed heavily. Fine. I will make the calls tomorrow. Chloe shot me a look of pure, unadulterated victory across the table. I just took a slow sip of my water. 3 days later, Dominic Ashford came to the house to formalize the new arrangement. When he walked into the parlor, my breath caught, and a phantom pain shot through my knee. He was just as handsome as I remembered, tall, broad-shouldered, with perfectly styled dark hair and a charming, predatory smile. To the rest of the world, he was the ultimate catch. To me, he was the devil in a tailored Tom Ford suit. Chloe, Dominic purred, taking her hand and kissing her knuckles. When your father called, I must admit I was thrilled. You've always been the firecracker. Chloe giggled, leaning into him, her hand resting flat against his chest. I couldn't let you marry my boring sister Dom. We're going to have so much fun. Dominic's eyes flicked to me, standing quietly in the corner. For a fraction of a second, the charming mask slipped, and I saw the cold, dead look in his eyes, the look he had right before he swung the golf club. I didn't flinch. I just stared back at him with dead, empty eyes until he looked away, slightly unnerved. The next few weeks were a blur of chaotic preparation. Because the weddings were to be a double ceremony at the Plaza Hotel in New York, the logistics were immense. Chloe was a nightmare demanding the most expensive Vera Wang gown, throwing tantrums over the floral arrangements, and insisting that her ring be upgraded to a 5-carat flawless diamond. Dominic accommodated her every whim, flashing that charming smile. But I could see the subtle clenching of his jaw. He was already drowning in debt. Chloe's extravagance was lighting a match to his fragile financial house of cards. As for me, I packed my life into 3 suitcases. I didn't want anything from this house. A week before the wedding, I requested to move my things to the William estate in the Berkshires to prepare the house for Noah's arrival post-wedding. In reality, I just wanted to get away from Dominic's suffocating proximity. The drive up to the Berkshires was dark and rainy. The William estate, known as Blackwood Manor, though the locals just called it the Old House, was a sprawling Gothic stone mansion surrounded by dense pine forests. It was intimidating, isolating, and utterly beautiful. When my driver pulled up, the massive oak doors opened, and a stern-looking housekeeper named Mrs. Higgins greeted me. "Miss Claire, Mr. William was not expecting you until after the ceremony." "I know," I said gently, "but I wanted to get a head start on organizing. Is he here?" "He is in the conservatory," she said, her tone guarded. "I must warn you, miss, he does not like visitors." "I'm not a visitor," I replied. "I'm his fiancée." I walked through the dimly lit halls, the air smelling of old paper and rain. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the conservatory. The room was overgrown with ferns and exotic orchids, but my eyes immediately locked onto the figure at the center of the room. Noah Williams sat in a highly customized motorized wheelchair. He had his back to me, working furiously on a multi-monitor setup that clashed completely with the Victorian aesthetic of the room. Lines of complex code scrolled rapidly across the screens. "I told you, Higgins, I don't want dinner." His voice was deep, raspy, and carried an edge of absolute authority. "Good thing I didn't bring any then," I said. Noah's wheelchair spun around with surprising speed. I finally saw him face to face. The left side of his face was a ruin of jagged, shiny scar tissue that trailed down his neck and disappeared beneath the collar of his black turtleneck. His left eye was slightly clouded, but his right eye, a piercing, intelligent, icy blue, locked onto me with the intensity of a sniper. He was incredibly handsome, even with the scars. There was a rugged, undeniable masculinity to him that his disability couldn't diminish. He stared at me, his jaw tightening. He was waiting for it. The flinch, the look of pity, the subtle step backward. I knew this was the exact moment Chloe had ruined in the past life by bursting into tears and calling him a monster. I didn't move. I held his gaze, my expression calm and curious. "Amelia," he finally said, his voice dropping an octave. The quiet twin. I was told Chloe couldn't stomach the sight of me and demanded a trade. "Chloe is an idiot," I said, plainly walking forward until I was only a few feet away from him. I looked at the monitors behind him. "Is that a quantum encryption algorithm?" Noah's good eye widened slightly, a flash of genuine surprise breaking through his hostile armor. "You know code? I know enough to see that you're hiding an empire in a greenhouse," I said, meeting his gaze again. "I'm not here to pity you, Noah, and I'm not here to play nurse. I'm here because I want it out of my arrangement as badly as you probably want out of yours. So, how about we make a deal? We stay out of each other's way, we maintain the alliance for our families, and in return, I will ensure this house runs perfectly so you can build whatever it is you're building in peace." Noah stared at me for a long, heavy moment. The tension in the room was palpable. Then slowly, the corner of his unscarred lip twitched upward into a ghost of a smirk. "You're very different from what the dossiers said about you, Amelia Claire." "Death changes a person," I murmured too low for him to hear. "I'll see you at the altar, Noah." The double wedding at the Plaza Hotel was the society event of the decade. The ballroom was transformed into a veritable forest of white roses and crystal chandeliers. 500 of the most influential people in the country were in attendance. The flashing of paparazzi cameras outside the hotel looked like a lightning storm. Chloe looked radiant, practically suffocating in her heavily corseted, diamond-encrusted Vera Wang gown. She walked down the aisle to a soaring string quartet, beaming as if she had already conquered the world. Dominic stood at the end of the aisle, looking like a prince out of a fairy tale. But from my vantage point, waiting in the wings for my turn, I saw the cracks. When Dominic took Chloe's hand at the altar, I saw his thumb dig brutally hard into the soft flesh of her wrist. I saw Chloe's smile falter for a microsecond, a flash of confusion crossing her eyes before she forced the grin back into place. "Rule number 1, Chloe," I thought coldly. "Dominic hates it when you try to lead." My walk down the aisle was vastly different. There were whispers as I stepped out in my elegant, understated silk A-line dress. But the whispers weren't about me. They were about Noah. He had refused to be rolled down the aisle by an attendant. Using a pair of highly advanced robotic leg braces, likely his own early prototypes, he had managed to lock his knees and stand at the altar, leaning heavily on a sleek carbon fiber cane. The effort it took him was immense. I could see the faint sheen of sweat on his brow and the rigid tension in his jaw. But he stood tall. He looked imposing, dangerous, and incredibly dignified in his midnight blue tuxedo. When I reached him, I didn't hesitate. I reached out and gently gripped his arm, offering subtle support without making it look like I was helping him. He looked down at me, his icy blue eyes softening just a fraction. "You didn't have to stand," I whispered as the bishop began the ceremony. "I won't have them looking down on my wife," he replied, his voice barely a rasp. My heart did a strange, unexpected flutter. In my past life, Dominic had only ever used me as a prop. Noah, despite being practically a stranger, was already protecting my dignity. The vows were exchanged. The rings were slipped onto fingers. The deed was done. At the lavish reception, the contrast between the two couples was stark. Chloe and Dominic were the center of attention, dancing flawlessly, drinking vintage champagne, and laughing loudly with the elite. Noah and I sat at a private table in the corner. He had unlatched the braces and returned to his chair, exhausted but stoic. We didn't speak much, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was a shared sanctuary amidst the noise. Halfway through the evening, Chloe strutted over to our table, her face flushed with alcohol and triumph. Dominic was occupied at the bar, charming a group of senators. "Having fun in the corner, Amelia," Chloe mocked, leaning down so only I could hear. "I must say Noah cleans up decently for a cripple, but enjoy pushing that wheelchair for the rest of your life. Dominic just promised me we're spending a month in the Maldives for our honeymoon." "Congratulations, Chloe," I said, smoothly, taking a sip of my sparkling water. "I hope the water is warm." "Oh, it will be," she sneered. She glanced at Noah, who was watching her with cold, calculating eyes. She shivered slightly, taking a step back. "You know, Amelia, I really did you a favor. You wouldn't have survived Dominic's world. You're too weak. You belong in the shadows." With a final gloating laugh, she turned and disappeared back into the glittering crowd. Noah watched her go, then shifted his gaze to me. "Your sister is a fool." "You have no idea," I replied. "She thinks she's won," Noah noted, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "She looks at Dominic Ashford and sees gold. I look at him and see a man 3 months away from defaulting on $500 million in offshore loans." I snapped my head toward Noah, my eyes wide. "You know about his debts?" Noah smirked a sharp, dangerous expression that made him look like a wolf. "Amelia, I know everything about everyone. Ashford Global is a sinking ship, and Dominic is drilling holes in the hull to sell the scrap metal. It's why he married into your family. He needs your father's capital." A genuine, relaxed smile finally broke across my face. In my past life, I hadn't found out about the bankruptcy until it was too late. Noah knew it from day one. "Well, Noah," I said, raising my glass toward him, "it seems we both dodged a bullet." He clinked his glass against mine. "To the shadows, Mrs. William." "To the shadows, Mr. William." The next morning we left for the Berkshires. While Chloe and Dominic jetted off to what she thought would be paradise, but what I knew would be the beginning of her isolation and psychological torture, I settled into Blackwood Manor. I kept my promise. I took over the running of the massive estate, dismissing the lazy staff and hiring loyal, discreet professionals. I ensured Noah's meals were brought to his lab perfectly timed, and I never interrupted his work. For the first month, we barely saw each other outside of dinner, but I wasn't idle. Using the allowance Reginald had provided me, I quietly began shorting Ashford Global stock through proxy accounts. I knew the exact dates Dominic's ships were going to be seized by creditors in the coming year. I was going to bleed him dry before he even realized he was cut. Then on a rainy Tuesday, the fragile peace of my new life was interrupted. I was in the library reviewing the estate accounts when my cell phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I answered it. "Amelia!" The voice was tiny, trembling, and choked with tears. "Chloe," I sat up straight, gripping the phone. "Amelia, please!" She sobbed, the sound of glass shattering echoing in the background. He locked me in. You have to help me. He's not who we thought he was." I closed my eyes, listening to the terrified whimpers of the sister who had happily condemned me to death just to steal my crown. The cycle was repeating, but the players had changed. "I'm sorry, Chloe," I whispered, my voice colder than the ice that had once frozen me to the basement floor. "But you're breaking up. Have a lovely honeymoon." I hung up, blocked the number, and went back to my ledger. The game had just begun. The autumn leaves around the William estate turned the color of rust and gold, mirroring the quiet transformation happening within its stone walls. 6 months had passed since the wedding, and the rhythm of my life with Noah had settled into a symphony of calculated ambition. We were a partnership in the truest sense. I had streamlined the estate's operations, ensuring that the physical environment was perfectly calibrated for his comfort and efficiency. But my involvement didn't stop at housekeeping. Noah had quickly realized that my mind was as sharp as his algorithms. While he was the undisputed genius behind the code of his company, Aegis Dynamics, he had little patience for the bureaucratic nightmare of patent law, corporate structuring, and venture capital negotiations. That was where I stepped in. I took over the financial and legal shielding of Aegis Dynamics. We spent our evenings in the library, a fire roaring in the massive stone hearth. Noah would sit in his customized chair, a tablet resting on his lap, while I paced the Persian rug, reviewing contracts and analyzing market trends. There were no romantic de-humiliations, no dramatic confessions of love. Instead, there was a profound, unspoken respect. When I spoke, he listened. When he needed a sounding board for a complex cybersecurity framework, I engaged. And all the while, my private financial war against Dominic Ashford was escalating. Through dummy corporations and offshore accounts, I had aggressively shorted Ashford Global stock. I knew the timeline of Dominic's collapse intimately from my past life. In October, a crucial shipment of rare earth metals would be seized by customs due to unpaid tariffs. In November, a major European investor would quietly pull out. I capitalized on every single failure, bleeding his inherited wealth into my own growing accounts. The public, however, remained blissfully ignorant. If you looked at the society pages, Dominic and Chloe Ashford were the undisputed king and queen of Manhattan. They were photographed on yachts, at polo matches, and dripping in designer labels. But I knew the signs. I knew what a woman fighting for her life behind closed doors looked like. The charade reached its boiling point in early December at the annual Winter Solstice Charity Ball at the Waldorf Astoria. It was mandatory attendance for families of our standing. Reginald Clare had explicitly demanded that both his daughters be there to present a unified front. When Noah and I arrived, the murmurs swept through the grand foyer like a sudden draft. I wore an emerald green velvet gown, severely elegant with a high neckline, and an open back paired with a simple, breathtaking diamond tennis necklace Noah had silently placed on my vanity that morning. Noah, as always, refused to be rolled in. He utilized his robotic leg braces, leaning heavily on his carbon fiber cane, his scarred face a mask of intimidating stoicism. We moved slowly, but we moved with undeniable power. We hadn't been in the ballroom for 10 minutes before I spotted her. Chloe was holding court near the ice sculptures. At first glance, she was radiant in a shimmering silver dress that left little to the imagination. But as I drew closer, the illusion fractured. She was dangerously thin. The heavy, expertly applied contouring on her face couldn't completely hide the hollows of her cheeks or the subtle, yellowish fade of a bruised cheekbone beneath her foundation. Her eyes, once bright with malicious arrogance, were darting and hyper-vigilant. Dominic stood beside her, his arm wrapped tightly around her waist. To the casual observer, it looked affectionate. To me, I recognized the vice-like grip of his fingers digging into her ribs. Look who decided to venture out of the woods. Dominic's smooth, falsely cheerful voice cut through the ambient jazz music as we approached. He extended a hand to Noah. "Noah, Amelia, you both look surprisingly well." Noah didn't take the offered hand. He simply stared at it until Dominic awkwardly lowered it. "Dominic," Noah rasped, his voice cutting through the noise. "I hear the shipping business has been turbulent lately. Rough seas." Dominic's jaw twitched. It was a microscopic movement, but I caught it. The European investor had pulled out just 3 days ago. Dominic was hemorrhaging cash, and he had no idea how Noah knew. Just typical fourth quarter fluctuations. Dominic lied smoothly, flashing his trademark smile. "Nothing Ashford Global can't weather. Speaking of weathering, Chloe and I were just talking about how much we pity you two locked away in that drafty old manor. Chloe insists we invite you to our penthouse for New Year's. Show you how the other half lives." Chloe's eyes flicked to me, a desperate silent plea, screaming in her hazel irises. "Help me," they said. "Please." I felt a cold wave of satisfaction wash over me. I remembered begging her for help in my past life, only for her to turn a blind eye, so she wouldn't lose access to the Ashford credit cards. "That's very generous, Dominic," I said, my voice perfectly level. "But Noah and I prefer the quiet. The city is so chaotic, and one never knows when a facade might suddenly crumble." Dominic's smile froze. Later that evening, I slipped away to the powder room to reapply my lipstick. The door opened, and Chloe practically fell inside, locking the deadbolt behind her. She leaned against the heavy oak door, gasping for air, as if she had been suffocating out in the ballroom. "Amelia," she choked out tears, instantly ruining her immaculate mascara. I turned slowly, capping my lipstick. "Hello, Chloe. You look tired." "You have to help me," she sobbed, rushing forward to grab my hands. Her fingers were ice cold and trembling violently. "He's a monster. He's crazy, Amelia. He lost $10 million in Macau last month, and when I asked him about it, he... She reached up trembling and pulled down the collar of her silver dress. Angry purple and yellow bruises mottled her collarbone and shoulder. My expression remained entirely blank. "That looks painful. Have you considered using a color-correcting concealer? Green neutralizes red." Chloe recoiled as if I had slapped her. "Are you insane? Did you not hear me? My husband is beating me. He's broke. He's forcing me to smile for the cameras while he uses my trust fund to pay off loan sharks." "Your trust fund?" I tilted my head. The one you insisted father put entirely in your name so you wouldn't have to share your Manhattan lifestyle with me. That trust fund. Amelia, please, she wailed, sinking to her knees, the expensive silk of her dress pooling on the marble floor. I know I was cruel. I know I forced you to take Noah. But you're safe. Noah is harmless. You have a peaceful life. You owe me. I let out a harsh, bitter laugh that echoed off the tiled walls. I owe you, Chloe. You practically danced on my grave to get to the altar. You thought you were stealing the golden goose, and you threw me to what you thought was a crippled, useless exile. You made your bed. Now you have to lie in it, even if the sheets are stained with blood. I stepped around her, my heels clicking sharply against the floor. He's going to kill me, she screamed at my back. I paused with my hand on the brass doorknob. I didn't turn around. Then you better learn how to survive, Chloe. Because I am not switching places with you. Not in this lifetime. I walked out, leaving her sobbing on the floor. The pity I might have once felt had been beaten out of me in a basement a lifetime ago. By February, the financial noose around Dominic Ashford's neck was pulled tight. The short positions I had taken on Ashford Global had paid out exponentially. I was quietly sitting on a fortune that rivaled the Clare family's entire net worth, entirely independent of Noah. But Noah was about to change the world. Aegis Dynamics was ready to launch its flagship product, a predictive AI cybersecurity defense system called the Oracle. It was designed to anticipate and neutralize cyber threats before they even materialized, and the U.S. Department of Defense had just secretly contracted it for an astronomical sum. Noah was no longer just the exiled, disabled son of the William family. He was about to become one of the most powerful tech magnates on the planet. The launch was to be announced on a Friday. On Thursday afternoon, uninvited and entirely desperate, Dominic and Chloe Ashford arrived at the gates of the William estate. Mrs. Higgins, the housekeeper, escorted them into the grand library where Noah and I were reviewing the final press releases. The contrast between our two couples was staggering. Noah and I were calm, composed, sitting at a massive mahogany table covered in schematics and legal documents. Dominic looked haggard. His suit, though expensive, hung slightly loose on his frame. The charming arrogance was gone, replaced by the manic, twitchy energy of a cornered predator. Chloe stood slightly behind him, completely silent, her eyes fixed on the floor. She looked like a ghost. Noah, Amelia, apologies for the intrusion, Dominic said, forcing a tight, unconvincing smile. But we are family, and family shouldn't need an appointment. Noah didn't look up from his tablet. Family is a biological accident, Dominic. Appointments are a matter of respect. You have 3 minutes. Dominic swallowed hard, clearly fighting the urge to lash out. He needed money too badly to let his ego win. I'll get straight to the point. Ashford Global is looking to diversify. We are putting together an exclusive investment pool for a new logistics network in Asia. I wanted to offer you the opportunity to get in on the ground floor. A family favor, just a $50 million buy-in. I leaned back in my leather chair, steepling my fingers. 50 million. That's a rather large favor, Dominic, especially considering the rumors that Ashford Global's European creditors are currently seizing your assets in the Mediterranean. Dominic's face drained of color. He stared at me, genuinely shocked. Where did you hear that? That's baseless slander. It's on the Bloomberg terminal, Dominic, Noah said softly, finally looking up. His icy blue eye pinned Dominic in place. As of 20 minutes ago, Ashford Global is officially in default. Your stock is currently in free fall. I imagine the SEC will be raiding your Manhattan offices by tomorrow morning to look into the dual ledgers you've been using to hide your gambling debts." Chloe let out a tiny, horrified gasp, her hands flying to her mouth. She looked at Dominic, true terror dawning in her eyes as she realized the full extent of the ruin. "Dual ledgers, Dom. What is he talking about?" "Shut up, Chloe," Dominic snapped, turning on her with a sudden vicious ferocity. He raised his hand, fully prepared to strike her right in front of us. "If you touch her in my house." Noah's voice was barely a whisper, yet it carried the weight of an executioner's blade. "I will have my security detail break both of your arms before they throw you off the property." Dominic froze, his hand trembling in the air. He looked at Noah, the physically broken man in the wheelchair, and realized he was staring into the eyes of a leviathan. Slowly, Dominic lowered his hand. "We need a loan." Dominic choked out, all pretense dropping. He was begging. "Noah, please. The William family has billions. Just a bridge loan to keep the creditors at bay. I'll pay you back with interest. I'll give you equity in the company." "I don't want equity in a sinking ship," Noah replied coldly. "And I don't use my family's money. I use my own." Noah tapped a button on his tablet. The massive flat-screen television mounted above the fireplace clicked on. It displayed a live feed of the financial news networks. The breaking news banner flashed in bright red letters. "William Air launches Aegis Dynamics, secures multi-billion-dollar DOD contract." Dominic stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. "Aegis. You're the CEO of Aegis." "I am the founder, the CEO, and the sole shareholder," Noah stated calmly. "As of tomorrow morning, my personal net worth will exceed the combined assets of the Ashford and Clare families by a factor of 10. He paused, letting the devastation sink in. "So, no, Dominic. I will not give you $50 million. I wouldn't give you 50 cents. Chloe slowly turned her head to look at Noah, then at me. The realization hit her with the physical force of a freight train. She had thrown away a multi-billionaire, a man of power and integrity, because she was too shallow to look past his scars and a wheelchair. She had traded a king for a bankrupt, abusive fraud. Her legs gave out. She collapsed onto the Persian rug, weeping silently, the sound raw and pathetic. "Security," I called out smoothly. 2 massive men in dark suits stepped into the library immediately. "Mr. and Mrs. Ashford were just leaving," I said, offering a polite, chilling smile. "Please see them out and ensure they never pass the gates again." Dominic didn't fight. He was completely broken. The security guards hauled a sobbing Chloe to her feet and escorted them out of the room. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind them. The silence that followed was profoundly peaceful. I looked at Noah. He was already back to reviewing the press release on his tablet, completely unbothered by the destruction he had just finalized. "That," I said softly, picking up my pen, "was incredibly satisfying." Noah didn't look up, but the scarred corner of his mouth twitched into a smile. "Just balancing the books, Amelia. Just balancing the books." The morning after Dominic and Chloe were escorted off the William estate, I woke up to the smell of freshly brewed espresso and the quiet hum of the television in our private sitting room. Noah was already awake, dressed in a crisp white shirt, his robotic braces locked into place as he stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the misty Berkshire Mountains. He held a cup of black coffee in one hand and a remote in the other. "Good morning," I murmured, tying my silk robe as I walked out of the bedroom. Noah didn't turn around, but he tilted his head slightly. "You're going to want to see this, Amelia. Channel 4. I grabbed my own cup of espresso from the silver tray and sat on the edge of the leather sofa. The screen showed a live helicopter feed hovering over the glittering glass skyscraper of Ashford Global in downtown Manhattan. It was a bloodbath. A dozen black SUVs with government plates were parked haphazardly on the sidewalk. Agents in dark windbreakers, emblazoned with the yellow letters SEC and FBI, were carrying out boxes of physical hard drives and filing cabinets. The ticker tape at the bottom of the screen read in alarming red letters, "Ashford Global, raided CEO Dominic. Ashford arrested on 34 counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering." Then the camera cut to the ground level. Dominic, stripped of his custom Tom Ford suit jacket and wearing only a rumpled dress shirt, was being shoved into the back of an unmarked vehicle, his hands cuffed tightly behind his back. He looked absolutely feral, shouting at the paparazzi, his perfectly styled hair hanging in his face. He wasn't the untouchable golden boy anymore. He was a caged animal. They found the dual ledgers. Noah stated plainly, taking a slow sip of his coffee. "My proprietary software algorithms flagged a massive irregular transfer of funds from Ashford's domestic accounts to a shell company in the Cayman Islands at 3 a.m. I anonymously forwarded the data packet to a contact I have at the Securities and Exchange Commission. They secured a warrant by dawn." I stared at the screen, a profound, icy calm settling over my chest. The man who had shattered my knee with a golf club, who had starved me in a concrete basement in another lifetime, was now stripped of his power, his wealth, and his freedom. "What about Chloe?" I asked, my voice steady. "Her trust fund was tied to Ashford Global's holding company as collateral." Noah replied, turning to face me. His unscarred eye was sharp and calculating. "When the assets were frozen this morning, her accounts were drained to zero to cover Dominic's immediate margin calls. She is completely destitute." My cell phone, resting on the coffee table, suddenly began to vibrate violently. The caller ID flashed mother. I let it ring 3 times before I picked it up. "Amelia." Beatrice Claire's voice was shrill, borderline hysterical, vibrating through the speaker. "Amelia, thank God. Have you seen the news? It's a disaster, a total catastrophe." "I'm watching it right now, Mother," I said, mildly crossing my legs. "It seems Dominic wasn't the brilliant investor Father thought he was. This is no time for 'I told you so', Amelia." She snapped, her superficial panic bleeding into anger. "The press is camped out in front of our townhouse. They're dragging the Claire name through the mud because of Chloe's marriage. Your father is having palpitations. You need to speak to Noah immediately." I raised an eyebrow. "Speak to Noah about what?" "Money, Amelia, money." She practically screamed. "The bail for Dominic is set at $20 million, and his assets are frozen. Your father's liquid capital is tied up in the Asian markets. Noah is a billionaire now. We saw the Aegis Dynamics launch. You need to have him wire the bail money, and then you need to send a private jet to bring Chloe here. She's hiding in some hideous 3-star hotel in Queens." I looked at Noah. He was watching me intently, silently waiting to see how I would handle the people who had happily sold me off. "Let me get this straight," I said. my voice dropping an octave, carrying the same lethal quietness that Noah often used. You want me to use my husband's money to bail out a man who verbally and physically abused my sister simply to save the family's PR image. And you want me to rescue the sister who forced me into a marriage she thought was a punishment. Your sister's Amelia. You owe us, Beatrice shrilled. We gave you life. We arranged a marriage that made you a billionaire's wife. You are being entirely selfish. I let out a soft, dark laugh. No, mother. You threw me to the wolves and you just happened to accidentally throw me into a gold mine instead. I don't owe you a single cent. In fact, you should probably call your own broker. What are you talking about? She stammered. While Dominic was playing with Monopoly money, I was heavily shorting Ashford Global stock for the last 6 months. I confessed thoroughly enjoying the sudden dead silence on the other end of the line. I made over $100 million off Dominic's collapse, and I used a fraction of that money to buy out the debt on Father's commercial real estate properties in Boston. If you ever contact me or Noah again demanding money, I will foreclose on your properties, and you will be joining Chloe in that 3-star hotel. Amelia, Beatrice whispered, sounding genuinely terrified for the first time in her life. You wouldn't. Watch me, I whispered back. Have a terrible day, mother. I hung up and dropped the phone onto the sofa. I looked up to find Noah staring at me, a rare, genuine smile curving the unscarred side of his mouth. Remind me never to cross you, Mrs. William, he said softly. You're the only one who never has, Mr. William, I replied, walking over to him and resting a hand lightly on his chest. For the first time since my rebirth, the lingering phantom pain in my knee completely vanished. I was free. 2 weeks passed. The fallout from the Ashford scandal dominated the national news cycle. Dominic was denied bail after Noah's anonymous tips revealed Dominic was planning to flee to a non-extradition country via a private airstrip. He was locked away in a federal holding facility, awaiting a trial that would undoubtedly end in decades behind bars. Meanwhile, Chloe was living a nightmare she had never prepared for. With her trust fund evaporated and our parents terrified of my financial retaliation, she was entirely cut off. She was forced to pawn her 5-carat engagement ring just to afford legal representation for the divorce proceedings and to keep a roof over her head. But Chloe was never one to accept defeat gracefully. In her twisted, arrogant mind, she was still the victim of a cosmic injustice. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, I received a text message from an unknown number. Amelia, please, I have nothing left. I'm sick. I just want to see my sister one last time. Meet me at the Plaza Tea Room at 4 p.m. Just us. I won't ask for money. I just need you. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone. The Plaza Hotel. The exact place where she had gloated in her Vera Wang gown and told me I belonged in the shadows. The poetic irony wasn't lost on me. She's planning something. Noah's voice pulled me from my thoughts. He rolled his chair into the library, a tablet glowing in his hand. My network flagged a burner phone registered under a fake name communicating with your number. It's pinging from a motel in the Bronx. It's Chloe. I know, I said, showing him the text. She wants to meet. She says she's sick and wants to reconcile. Noah's blue eye narrowed, scanning the text. It's a trap. She's desperate. Desperate people do not seek closure. They seek a way out. You are not going. Noah, I said gently, walking over to his chair and leaning down so we were eye level. If I don't go, she will keep trying. She will find a way to ambush me when I'm not prepared. I need to end this completely, on my terms. He looked at me, the rigid lines of his jaw tight with protective tension. Then you wear a wire, and I'm sending my private security detail to sit 3 tables away. If she so much as reaches into her purse aggressively, they will snap her wrists. Deal. I agreed, a cold thrill of anticipation rushing through my veins. At 3:45 p.m., I walked into the opulent Palm Court at the Plaza Hotel. I wore a tailored slate gray Chanel suit, my hair pulled back into a severe, elegant chignon. I looked exactly like the untouchable billionaire's wife she had desperately wanted to be. Chloe was already sitting at a corner table. If I hadn't known it was her, I might have walked right past. The transformation was horrifying. Her ash blonde hair, usually perfectly blown out, was brittle and pulled back into a messy knot. She was wearing a cheap off-the-rack trench coat, and she had lost at least 15 pounds. The bruising on her face had faded to a sickly yellow, but the manic, frantic light in her hazel eyes was burning brighter than ever. As I sat down across from her, she stared at me. She didn't look at my face. She looked at my clothes, my flawless diamond earrings, the subtle glow of expensive skincare. She was looking at a mirror image of what she believed was rightfully hers. "Hello, Chloe," I said, smoothly, folding my hands on the pristine white tablecloth. "You look well," she rasped. Her voice sounded like it had been dragged over gravel. She pushed a teacup toward me. "I ordered your favorite, Earl Grey, 2 sugars." I looked at the teacup. Then I looked at her trembling hands, which she quickly hid under the table. She was twitching. "Thank you," I said, making no move to touch the porcelain cup. "You said you wanted to talk." "Talk." Chloe swallowed hard, her eyes darting around the room before locking onto mine. "Dominic ruined me, Amelia. He took everything. My money, my reputation, my mind." A tear slipped down her hollow cheek. "You were right. I was a fool. I should have never made you switch with me. I'm so sorry." "Apology acknowledged," I said, flatly. "Is there anything else?" Her facade cracked slightly, a flash of genuine anger bleeding through the fake remorse. "You have everything. Noah is a titan. You live like a queen. You have to help me, Amelia. We're identical twins. We share the same blood." "We share blood, Chloe, not bank accounts," I replied coldly. "You made a gamble and you lost. I am not your safety net." Chloe's breathing grew ragged. She leaned forward, her eyes wide, entirely unhinged. "Drink your tea, Amelia. Please, just drink the tea and we can talk about this like sisters." I stared at the teacup. The liquid inside was slightly cloudy. "What's in it, Chloe?" I asked softly. "Lorazepam ambien, a heavy dose of sedatives you bought off the street in the Bronx." Chloe froze, the color completely draining from her face. I don't know what you're talking about. Did you really think I wouldn't see it coming?" I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "What was the plan? Drug me, drag me out to your rusted rental car, dye my hair, and dump me in a motel room while you put on my Chanel suit and walk into the William estate pretending to be me." Chloe gasped, shrinking back into her chair. I had hit the nail directly on the head. "You're insane!" She whispered, her hands shaking so badly she knocked a spoon off the table. "You're paranoid." "I'm a survivor," I corrected her. I reached into my purse and pulled out a thick manila envelope, tossing it onto the table between us. "What is this?" she choked out. "Those are the foreclosure documents for our parents' estate," I said, a cruel smile finally breaking across my face. "I took their properties this morning. They are officially bankrupt. And this, I tapped the table next to the poisoned tea, is attempted assault. Before she could even process my words, two massive men in dark suits stepped out from behind a marble pillar. My security detail. "Ma'am," the lead guard said, his voice carrying across the quiet room, causing several wealthy patrons to turn and look. "Is this woman harassing you?" "Yes," I said, standing up smoothly and brushing an invisible speck of dust off my skirt. "She also attempted to poison my beverage." "Please call the authorities. I'll be pressing charges for attempted felony assault." Chloe let out a blood-curdling scream, lunging across the table at me, her manicured nails aiming for my eyes. "You stole my life. It was supposed to be mine. I'm supposed to be Mrs. William." The guards caught her mid-air. They slammed her back down into the chair, pinning her arms behind her back with brutal efficiency. She thrashed and wailed, her trench coat tearing as she sobbed hysterically in front of the entire Plaza Hotel, the very place she thought she had cemented her reign as queen of high society. I stood over her, looking down at the pathetic broken shell of the sister who had once happily handed me a death sentence. "You're wrong, Chloe," I whispered over her screams. "I didn't steal your life. I just survived the one you forced me into." I turned on my heel and walked out of the Palm Court, the sound of police sirens already wailing in the distance. The sound of Judge Harrison Caldwell's gavel, echoing through the federal courtroom in downtown Manhattan, sounded remarkably like the heavy iron door of a basement slamming shut. For me, it was the sound of absolute irrevocable freedom. It was mid-October, nearly a year to the day since my rebirth, and the trial of Dominic Ashford was the media circus of the century. Noah and I sat in the front row of the gallery, flanked by our private security. I wore a tailored crimson blazer, a deliberate, vibrant contrast to the dull, suffocating grays of the courtroom. Dominic sat at the defense table, but he was unrecognizable. The federal holding facility at Rikers Island had stripped him of his golden boy aura. He had lost weight, his skin was sallow, and the charming, predatory gleam in his eyes had been replaced by the hollow stare of a cornered rat. He hadn't just been embezzling. When Noah's AI, the Oracle, decrypted the servers hidden in Dominic's offshore shell companies, it revealed a truth far darker than simple corporate fraud. Dominic had been washing money for a brutal Eastern European syndicate to cover his catastrophic gambling losses. He had leveraged his family's legacy, his investors' capital, and finally my parents' wealth to keep men who break legs for a living at bay. The prosecution presented the evidence systematically, a surgical dismantling of a monster. But the true twist came on the fourth day of the trial. The lead prosecutor, a sharp woman named Sarah Jenkins, played an audio recording retrieved from one of Dominic's burner phones. It was a call made just days before the raid. "The tech cripple is the problem." Dominic's voice crackled through the courtroom speakers, dripping with venom and panic. "William knows too much. He's squeezing my margins. I need him removed. Make it look like a malfunction with his wheelchair on those steep Berkshire roads. I don't care how you do it, just get it done before Friday." A collective gasp swept through the gallery. Attempted murder. Conspiracy to commit homicide. I felt Noah's hand slide over mine, his long, scarred fingers lacing through mine. His grip was warm and grounding. I looked at him, and his icy blue eye was fixed on Dominic with the calm, terrifying indifference of an apex predator watching its prey bleed out. Noah had known about the hit. His predictive security software had flagged the hired contractor the moment he entered the state. Noah had handed the contractor to the FBI on a silver platter, securing the final nail in Dominic's coffin. When the verdict was read, guilty on all 34 counts, including conspiracy to commit murder, Dominic didn't look at the judge. He turned around and locked eyes with me. There was no regret in his gaze, only a burning, impotent hatred. But I didn't flinch. I just tilted my head, gave him a small, cold smile, and watched the marshals drag him away in handcuffs. He was sentenced to 85 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. He would die in a cage. As for Chloe, she never even made it to a courtroom. After her violent outburst and attempted poisoning at the plaza, her defense attorney successfully argued that she was psychologically unfit to stand trial. The sudden loss of her wealth, combined with the extreme psychological abuse she suffered during her short marriage to Dominic, had caused a complete mental collapse. She accepted a plea deal that avoided prison time, but mandated indefinite commitment to a high-security psychiatric facility in upstate New York. Against my better judgment, I visited her once. The facility was sterile, smelling heavily of bleach and institutional food. Chloe sat by a reinforced window in the visitor's room, wearing a standard-issue gray sweatsuit. Her hair was completely gray at the roots, her eyes vacant as she stared out at the bare trees. "Chloe," I said, softly, taking a seat across from her. She didn't look at me. She just traced an invisible circle on the table with a trembling finger. "They took the chandelier," she whispered, her voice devoid of emotion. "The one in the penthouse. Dominic said it was imported from Italy, but it was glass. It was just cheap glass. He lied." "He lied about everything, Chloe," I replied. She finally turned her gaze to me. For a fleeting second, the old Chloe, the arrogant, demanding twin who thought she was entitled to the world, flickered in her hazel eyes. "You have my ring, Amelia. Give it back. I need to wear it for the gala tonight." My heart hardened. The pity I almost felt evaporated. She wasn't sorry for what she did to me. She was only sorry that she had lost the game. "There is no gala, Chloe," I said, standing up and buttoning my coat. "Goodbye." I walked out of the facility, leaving her trapped in a prison of her own delusions. By the spring of 2026, the world belonged to us. Aegis Dynamics was no longer just a company. It was the invisible shield protecting the global digital infrastructure. Noah was hailed as a visionary, a modern-day titan whose scarred face and robotic braces became symbols of unbreakable resilience. And I was his COO, the ruthless architect of our corporate expansions, feared and respected in equal measure across Wall Street. My parents, Reginald and Beatrice, had been thoroughly humbled. Without their estates, their social standing evaporated overnight. I granted them a modest, highly restricted monthly stipend, just enough to rent a 2-bedroom apartment in a dreary suburb of Boston and buy groceries. They were entirely dependent on the daughter they had discarded. They called me every Thanksgiving. I never answered. There was only one piece of the past left to handle. When the federal government auctioned off Dominic Ashford's seized assets to pay his victims, I quietly purchased the sprawling Ashford estate in Connecticut through a blind trust. On a rainy Tuesday, I drove out to the property alone. The massive mansion was empty, stripped of its expensive art and velvet furniture. Dust motes danced in the gray light, filtering through the towering windows. My heels clicked loudly on the hardwood as I walked past the grand ballroom and down the servants' corridor. I stopped in front of a heavy iron-wrought door at the end of the hall. The lock was rusted. My chest tightened, a phantom ache blooming in my left knee. I pulled a crowbar from the canvas bag I had brought. and wedged it into the latch, forcing my weight against it until the metal shrieked and gave way. The door swung open, revealing a set of steep concrete stairs descending into absolute darkness. I clicked on a heavy-duty flashlight and walked down. The smell hit me first. Mold-damp earth and the metallic tang of old copper. It was the exact smell of my nightmare. At the bottom of the stairs, the flashlight beam swept across the freezing concrete floor, the rusted pipes, and the heavy chain bolted to the wall in the corner. This was where I had died. This was where Dominic had thrown me when I uncovered his secrets, leaving me to rot while he maintained his perfect facade for the cameras. I stood in the center of the freezing room, my breath pluming in the cold air. I waited for the panic to consume me. I waited for the tears, the terror, the suffocating helplessness. But nothing came. Instead, I felt a profound, untouchable peace. The ghost of the girl who had died on this floor was gone. In her place stood a woman who had dismantled an empire, destroyed her abusers, and claimed a life of absolute power. My phone buzzed in my pocket, cutting through the heavy silence. It was Noah. "You're at the estate," his deep, raspy voice came through the speaker. It wasn't a question. He always knew where I was. "I am," I replied, shining the flashlight onto the chain on the wall. "Do you need me to send the cars?" He asked, a subtle undercurrent of protectiveness in his tone. "No," I said, a genuine smile breaking across my face in the darkness. "I just needed to see it one last time. Send the construction crew tomorrow morning, Noah. I want this basement filled with industrial concrete, right up to the ceiling, and then bulldoze the house." "Consider it done," he said. A pause hung on the line, heavy with the unspoken understanding that had defined our entire marriage. "Come home, Amelia. I'm on my way." I walked back up the stairs, leaving the flashlight on the floor to cast shadows against the walls. I didn't close the iron door behind me. I walked out of the mansion into the pouring rain and got into my waiting car. When I arrived back at the William estate in the Berkshires, the massive oak doors were already open. The fire was roaring in the grand library, casting a warm golden glow over the Persian rugs and towering bookshelves. Noah was waiting for me. He had unlatched his leg braces and was sitting in his chair by the fire, 2 glasses of vintage scotch resting on the table beside him. I walked over the dampness of my coat, clinging to me, and sank onto the floor right in front of his chair. I rested my head against his knee. He didn't ask questions. He simply reached out his scarred hand, gently stroking my damp hair, grounding me in the present. Ours wasn't a fairy tale romance. It wasn't born of poetic vows or breathless passion. It was forged in the fire of survival. We were 2 people who had been broken by the world, discarded for our perceived weaknesses, who had instead weaponized our scars to conquer it. Chloe had thought she was stealing a crown, but all she did was hand me the sword. I looked up at Noah, the firelight dancing in his icy blue eye. He handed me a glass of scotch. "To the shadows," I whispered, raising the glass. Noah's lips curved into a sharp, knowing smile. He clinked his glass against mine. "To the empire we built in them." That wraps up the incredibly twisted and satisfying story of Amelia and Chloe. It just goes to show that true power isn't about the glittering facade or the society pages. It's about the quiet, brilliant minds working in the shadows. Amelia didn't just escape her fate. She rewrote the entire game and let her greedy twin sister walk right into the nightmare she created. If you loved this story of vengeance, rebirth, and absolute justice, hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more crazy real-life dramas. Drop a comment below. Do you think Chloe's punishment in the psychiatric ward was worse than prison? Let me know.